The night air in the highlands of Scotland was unusually still, an eerie calm that blanketed the hills and forests surrounding the small villages below. Smoke from the hearths of scattered cottages rose lazily into the sky, yet a deeper, more sinister smoke was gathering beyond the hills, the faintest glimmer of orange flickers that seemed alive with intent. Whispers had traveled through the villages for weeks, rumors of a secret group that met in the shadows, a cult devoted to fire and destruction, yet the villagers dismissed them as drunken tales, stories told by old men to frighten children into obedience. But on this night in the year 1856, the whispers would prove terrifyingly real. Families huddled in their cottages, locking doors, bolting windows, praying against a danger they could neither see nor name. The cult moved silently through the night, torches carried high, shadows stretching unnaturally across the heather-covered hills. Their chants rose and fell like waves, a guttural rhythm that seemed to echo in the bones of anyone unfortunate enough to hear. Those who had stumbled upon their gatherings spoke of masks, painted in grotesque shapes, eyes burning with fanatic fire. The cult believed themselves conduits of divine wrath, purging the land of sinners through flame, their devotion absolute, their cruelty unmatched. Villagers who attempted to flee were met with the cult's relentless force, driven by a combination of fear, zeal, and an almost supernatural coordination. By the time the first cries were heard, the night was already ablaze with the deadly orange glow. Homes and barns became infernos within moments, flames leaping higher than any that had ever been seen in the highlands, swallowing everything in their path. Men, women, and children, none were spared. Screams pierced the thick smoke, mingling with the crackling of timber, the roar of fire consuming life and land alike. The cult moved among the flames, their torches seeming to dance in synchronization with the destruction, ensuring that no corner was safe, no family spared. Survivors, few and scattered, spoke of impossible speed, of fire that seemed to follow its own intelligence, and of shadows in the blaze that did not belong to any human figure. The village itself became a maze of burning structures, the scent of scorched wood and human flesh mingling in a way that would haunt the memories of any witness forever. The cult chanted, called upon their unseen deities, and celebrated the devastation as though it were a festival of divine judgment. Villagers hiding in cellars, caves, and riverbanks described a terror that was both immediate and abstract. The fire did not only destroy the body, it seemed to consume the very essence of life, leaving behind a charred emptiness, a memory of the person rather than their presence. Outside the village, the rolling hills bore witness to the approach of more followers, some on horseback, some moving with silent precision, converging on neighboring settlements with the same lethal intent. By the time dawn threatened the horizon, the cult had executed its plan flawlessly. Over 200 victims had perished in a single night, leaving behind ruins that would take generations to recover. The survivors spoke in hushed tones, recounting details that seemed too horrific to believe. Every story contained elements of the unbelievable: flames moving against wind, torches held without hands, shadows that leaped independently of any fire. The aftermath of the night was not just death, but terror that would echo through the highlands for decades. Tales whispered to children, warnings etched into memory, the haunted silence of the hills serving as a perpetual reminder of the cult's brutality. Scholars who later investigated the event noted patterns that defied explanation: traces of accelerants, arrangements of fire that suggested premeditated architecture, yet human comprehension faltered in the face of sheer devastation. The cult's motives were recorded in fragmented documents, scraps of parchment found in abandoned huts, detailing rituals, incantations, and a philosophical devotion to purification through flame. Yet these writings explained nothing of the fire's seeming intelligence, the way it moved and consumed with an almost sentient precision. Survivors described masks, painted with grotesque colors, resembling human faces twisted in screams, their wearers chanting in languages long dead or invented, sounds that seemed to vibrate the very ground beneath them. Some who fled into forests and hills reported hearing the faintest whispers calling their names. The voices carried by the wind, chilling and precise, as though the cult could reach through distance and time. The flames had a life of their own, consuming not only structures but the very morale and spirit of the villagers. The landscape itself was altered: blackened earth, charred remnants of once thriving farms, twisted metal and stone, a testament to a night that would never be forgotten. Families were scattered, names lost to records, survivors vanished into anonymity, forever carrying the trauma of what had occurred. The highlands, once serene and green, bore the scars of fire and fanaticism, and every whisper of wind seemed to carry echoes of that night. Legends grew, tales that the cult was not mortal, that their power derived from something darker than mere zealotry, that their fires were not lit by ordinary means but by some cursed influence, supernatural or otherwise. Some villagers swore they saw torches floating, flames moving as if with a will of their own, the cult's chants continuing even when no one was present. The night became a permanent scar in the collective memory of the region, a cautionary tale of devotion gone mad, of fire worship twisted into mass murder, and of human cruelty amplified to its most terrifying extreme. Scholars, priests, and wanderers who came decades later would recount the horror in meticulous detail, piecing together accounts that still defied reason. The cult's fire became a symbol of unchecked fanaticism, a story told to children to instill obedience and fear, yet each retelling carried a visceral reminder of the night when 200 souls were consumed. Some survivors reported seeing shadows even after the fire was extinguished, remnants of the cult moving silently through the ashes, whispers urging them to forget, to hide, to fear. The tragedy was not only in the death of bodies but in the erasure of lives, livelihoods, and the very memory of what once was. The cult's devotion to fire ensured that every trace of their victims was consumed, leaving only blackened earth, smoldering ruins, and the haunted silence of hills and valleys. Even years later, the highlands were said to be cursed, travelers reporting strange heat in the air, faint flickers of light in abandoned clearings, and the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. The introduction of this night set the stage for centuries of legend, mystery, and fear, a chilling reminder that human belief, when twisted into fanaticism, can consume more than just morality. It can annihilate life itself, leaving behind a shadow that refuses to fade. And so, the night of 200 burned victims became immortal, etched into folklore and whispered from generation to generation, an eternal testament to the haunted, brutal, and tragic power of the cult of fire. In the year 1856, Scotland was a land of misty highlands, small villages, and winding rivers, where life moved slowly, and the shadows of ancient forests held countless secrets. The people were simple, bound by traditions, superstitions, and faith in a world they barely understood. In these hills, rumors had long circulated of strange gatherings, of groups disappearing into the night, and of fires burning in places that should have remained untouched. These whispers spoke of a cult, devoted to fire, worshipping its destructive power as divine justice. The origins of the cult were obscure, its members hidden from sight and their purpose cloaked in secrecy. Some claimed the cult was centuries old, passed down from one fanatic generation to the next, while others believed it had arisen suddenly, fueled by madness and religious fervor. Historians later pieced together fragments of their existence, discovering coded journals, obscure symbols etched into hillsides, and scattered remnants of torches used in ritual ceremonies. The cult's philosophy was rooted in the belief that fire was purification, that it could cleanse sin, corruption, and weakness from the world. To them, human life was secondary, expendable in service to the sacred flames. Leaders of the cult were charismatic and terrifying, instilling obedience through fear, indoctrination, and ritual. Villagers who came across them spoke of masks painted in grotesque designs, of chants that rose and fell in strange rhythms, and of eyes that seemed to burn with unholy fire. These leaders claimed visions, messages from unseen powers guiding their actions, instructing them to target entire villages as offerings to their deity of flame. Scotland's rural villages were unprepared for such fanaticism. Life was normally measured, cautious, and repetitive, with people relying on community, faith, and the land for survival. The sudden intrusion of a group so devoted to destruction created a climate of terror, even before the night of mass death occurred. The cult's members moved silently, often hidden by the terrain, forests, and hills, scouting locations, observing patterns, and preparing for the perfect moment to strike. Survivors later recounted that the cult's knowledge of the land was uncanny, their ability to traverse forests and hills unnoticed, nearly supernatural. Their torches, ritual fires, and tools were carefully concealed, their movements calculated to maximize chaos and prevent escape. The highlands, normally quiet at night, became a stage for preparation, with faint flickers of light, muffled chants, and shadows that appeared to dance on their own. For weeks before the massacre, villagers reported strange occurrences: sudden cold snaps in summer, animals behaving erratically, and distant fires visible on hillsides that vanished by morning. Some dismissed these as natural phenomena, while others suspected the presence of the cult. Yet none could anticipate the scale of the horror to come. Political authorities and law enforcement, limited in number and resources, were powerless. Scotland's geography, with its winding hills and remote valleys, made rapid response impossible. By the time the first attacks began, the cult had already positioned itself strategically, ensuring that no aid could arrive in time to save the victims. The cult's philosophy was meticulously documented in journals later recovered from abandoned hideouts. They spoke of fire as life and death, of purging the unworthy, and of devotion that demanded total commitment. These texts revealed chilling insights. Members were indoctrinated from childhood, trained to follow orders without hesitation, and taught to revel in the destruction they caused. The mass murder of 200 victims in a single night was not an accident, but a carefully orchestrated execution of this philosophy. Survivors recalled being captured, bound, or chased, forced into hiding, while flames consumed homes, livestock, and entire communities. The cult's preparation involved meticulous planning, identifying targets, arranging escape routes, timing attacks to coincide with nightfall and wind direction, and using fire in ways that human understanding could barely comprehend. Even the villagers who escaped described the terror in precise detail: torches that seemed to leap without hands, flames that moved independently, and shadows that followed with intelligence. The background of the cult also involved dark rituals. Masks, chants, and symbolic gestures were integral, creating an atmosphere of fear and reverence simultaneously. Each member internalized these rituals, reinforcing loyalty and the shared belief that their actions were divinely mandated. Some records suggest that these rituals involved sacrifices and offerings prior to the mass burning, heightening the sense of inevitability that surrounded the night. This combination of fanaticism, careful planning, and ritualistic preparation made the event of that night not merely a crime but a phenomenon, an intersection of human cruelty, superstition, and a philosophy that elevated destruction to an art form. Scotland would remember the Night of Fire as a turning point, a moment when the natural calm of Highland life was shattered, leaving a legacy of fear, haunted memories, and cautionary tales that endured for generations. The villages affected were never fully the same, the survivors forever changed, and the land itself scarred by the flames. Historians later noted that the cult's methods were disturbingly efficient. Their ability to coordinate, execute, and vanish before authorities arrived, demonstrating a level of organization that belied their fanatical appearance. The cult's background was a mixture of hidden history, oral tradition, and fragmentary documents, leaving much to mystery, speculation, and horror. Their existence remained a haunting reminder of what human belief, when twisted by fanaticism and devotion to destruction, could achieve. Scotland's highlands, forests, and valleys thus became the backdrop for an event that combined geography, human psychology, and ritualistic violence into a single, unforgettable night. Survivors' accounts spoke not only of the immediate horror but of a lasting presence, as though the cult's power and the fire itself lingered in the hills, watching, waiting, ensuring that the memory of their brutality would never fade. The villagers who survived the cult's terror carried scars deeper than flesh or memory. They lived in constant fear, haunted by the knowledge of what had transpired and what could occur again. Families were torn apart, children orphaned, and homes left in ashes. The landscape transformed into a charred wasteland where life once flourished. Those who fled to neighboring towns spoke of the night in trembling whispers, describing shadows that seemed to follow them, faint flickers of torchlight in the distance, and an oppressive presence that felt alive, sentient, and malevolent. Scholars who later attempted to document the cult's existence relied heavily on these testimonies, piecing together fragmented narratives to reconstruct the horrors of that night. The cult's influence stretched beyond the immediate victims. People living miles away reported unexplained fires, sudden illnesses, and the sense of being observed, suggesting that the cult's reach, whether real or psychological, extended far beyond the villages directly attacked. The organization of the cult was meticulous. They selected members for unwavering loyalty, trained them in the handling of fire as both tool and weapon, and instilled a philosophy that elevated destruction to a sacred act. Initiation rituals involve tests of obedience, endurance, and the willingness to commit acts that would be incomprehensible to ordinary humans. These rituals bonded members, reinforcing a collective identity that placed the cult above morality, law, or empathy. Surviving documents indicate that the cult had a hierarchy: leaders who strategized and planned, intermediaries who coordinated local actions, and foot soldiers who executed orders with mechanical precision. Their devotion to fire was total, treating it not merely as a weapon but as a living entity, deserving of worship, care, and strategic use. The geography of Scotland played a crucial role in the cult's operations. Remote hills, dense forests, and winding rivers provided cover for movement, escape routes, and secret meeting places. Villagers noted that the cult seemed intimately familiar with the land, navigating treacherous terrain without hesitation and appearing suddenly in places thought inaccessible. Their knowledge of the wind, the layout of villages, and the timing of human routines allowed them to strike with devastating efficiency. Eyewitnesses described the cult's methods as almost ritualistic. Torches were raised in precise sequences, chants synchronized to the movement of flames, and patterns of attack designed to trap victims, prevent escape, and maximize destruction. The fire itself seemed to obey their intentions, leaping where commanded, spreading rapidly, and consuming structures before aid could arrive. Some survivors believed that the cult had discovered a supernatural method to control fire, an ability that defied natural explanation and contributed to the terrifying legend that would endure for generations. The aftermath of their planning and execution left an indelible mark on Scotland's cultural memory. Villages were rebuilt, yet the landscape remained scarred with blackened earth and twisted remnants of once thriving farms. People avoided forests and hills where the cult had been sighted, attributing every flicker of light or sound to lingering remnants of their presence. Stories of the cult's background became intertwined with superstition, folklore, and cautionary tales, ensuring that future generations would approach Highland nights with fear and respect. The leader's philosophy was recorded in scattered journals, etched symbols, and oral narratives. These sources reveal a chilling worldview. Fire was a purifying force, obedience to the cult was a moral imperative, and the destruction of human life was justified as a sacred act. The cult's members internalized this worldview completely, demonstrating a fanaticism that was both fascinating and horrifying to historians and survivors alike. Some accounts suggest that members trained in isolation, enduring harsh conditions to test their physical and psychological limits, ensuring they could operate under extreme stress, maintain composure, and execute orders regardless of personal morality. The meticulous preparation before the night of mass murder reflects this dedication. Selection of targets, timing attacks with natural conditions, and coordinating the spread of fire with military-like precision. The combination of fanaticism, planning, and knowledge of the land created a scenario in which over 200 victims could be burned in a single night, leaving minimal chance of escape or survival. Scotland's law enforcement, limited by geography and resources, was powerless to intervene. By the time authorities learned of the attack, the cult had vanished into the hills, leaving behind ruins, smoke, and silence. Survivors' narratives spoke of an almost supernatural awareness in the cult members, as though they anticipated every move, every attempt at escape, and every human reaction. This background is essential to understanding the horror of that night. The cult was not a disorganized band of criminals. It was a calculated, ritualistic, and philosophically driven organization whose devotion to fire and destruction elevated their actions to a level that defied comprehension. Their training, planning, and philosophy combined to create a perfect storm of human cruelty, fanaticism, and strategic brilliance. The Highlands, once serene, became a haunted reminder of what human belief can accomplish when twisted by devotion to destruction. Survivors lived in perpetual vigilance. Communities developed new customs to avoid attracting the cult's attention, and oral histories passed down the terror from generation to generation. Scholars today continue to study the cult, attempting to separate myth from fact, yet the sheer scale of destruction, combined with the documented philosophy, ritual, and strategy, confirms that the cult's Night of Fire was a deliberate, calculated, and horrifying event. The background of the cult is thus inseparable from the geography, culture, and psychology of Scotland in 1856. Understanding the preparation, training, and ideology of the cult members is crucial to comprehending the horror that unfolded. The 200 lives lost and the enduring fear that still lingers in the stories, legends, and haunted highlands of Scotland. Weeks before the fateful night, villagers in the highlands began noticing unusual signs, subtle yet deeply unsettling, that hinted at the impending horror. Fires that seemed to ignite on their own in abandoned fields, strange symbols carved into trees, and distant chants carried by the wind stirred anxiety in communities long accustomed to isolation and superstition. The villagers whispered about shadows that moved with intelligence, figures glimpsed in moonlight that vanished when approached, and animals fleeing in terror from invisible presences. Some elders spoke of dreams, recurring visions of flames consuming homes, of masked figures orchestrating destruction, warnings that went unheeded until it was too late. Merchants passing through the villages noticed the tension, the hushed conversations, and the empty-eyed stares of people who had begun to fear even the approach of strangers. Rumors spread quickly, tales of a cult devoted to fire preparing a night of unimaginable carnage. Those who encountered the cult directly often returned shaken, silent for days, unable to convey the full extent of what they had seen. They spoke of torches that burned unnaturally bright, of masks painted in grotesque patterns, of chanting that seemed to reverberate through the very bones. Scholars later examining these accounts remarked on the consistency of descriptions, the chilling precision of the cult's rituals, and the almost supernatural ability to remain undetected until the moment of attack. Villagers attempted to organize defenses, but fear and uncertainty paralyzed their efforts. The cult's preparation was meticulous. Reconnaissance missions, mapping escape routes, and positioning for maximum effect were conducted with military-like precision. By the time the first villagers noticed movement on the hills, the cult had already perfected their plan. Observers reported strange nocturnal gatherings, groups moving silently through forests, lights flickering like distant stars, and the unsettling hum of coordinated chants that seemed to resonate with the environment itself. Even those familiar with the Highlands' eerie nights found these events profoundly unnatural. Children spoke of seeing shadows dance in the moonlight, of hearing whispers calling their names, and of sudden gusts of heat in areas far from any fire. Adults dismissed some of these accounts as imagination, yet a growing number of villagers felt a creeping dread that could not be explained away. The cult's philosophy played a crucial role in the buildup. Their belief in fire as a purifying divine force meant that preparation was both spiritual and practical. Rituals were conducted in secret, ensuring that every member internalized obedience, learned the precise use of flame, and understood the importance of fear as a tool. Initiates were trained to suppress hesitation, to ignore empathy, and to view destruction as a sacred act. Survivors later recounted subtle signs of the cult's growing confidence in the days leading up to the massacre. Torches stacked in hidden locations, secret signals passed between members, and eerie patterns of movement that suggested premeditation. The villagers, unaware of the precise danger, grew increasingly anxious. Gates were reinforced, livestock sheltered, and families huddled in homes at night. Yet none could have anticipated the scale of the impending horror. Even the local clergy warned of spiritual darkness, urging prayer and vigilance. But their influence could not counteract the methodical planning of the cult. Traders and travelers reported seeing small groups moving with intent, disappearing into forests and returning with faint traces of smoke and a chilling silence. These signs, while ominous, were subtle enough to be dismissed by many, contributing to a sense of disbelief and unpreparedness when the night arrived. The buildup was characterized by tension, anticipation, and the unnerving realization that an unstoppable force was approaching. Villagers described feeling eyes upon them, an unseen presence monitoring their every move, a psychological manipulation that left them hesitant, fearful, and vulnerable. As the days passed, the cult's coordination became increasingly apparent to those who dared observe. Hidden paths, signaling mechanisms, and precise timing indicated a level of preparation that defied ordinary human capability. Whispers of a coming calamity grew, carried on the wind and shared in hushed tones, warning of fire, death, and an unrelenting cult whose devotion was absolute. These weeks of mounting tension created an atmosphere of dread, conditioning the Highlanders to the inevitability of destruction. By the night of the massacre, fear had taken root so deeply that even the bravest villagers hesitated to flee or resist, paralyzed by the cumulative weight of the cult's psychological and physical preparation. The buildup was not merely external. It infiltrated the minds of the villagers, shaping perception, anticipation, and the very way they experienced the highlands. Every rustle of leaves, flicker of light, and distant sound became a potential threat, a reminder of the unstoppable force gathering just beyond their sight. In this way, the cult ensured that when the Night of Fire arrived, its impact was total, both physically and psychologically, leaving no aspect of the village untouched by terror. The final nights before the massacre were filled with a sense of inevitability, an oppressive heaviness that settled over the villages like a suffocating fog. Those who had glimpsed the cult or heard the distant chanting felt their pulse quicken with every shadow, every flicker of light, as if the darkness itself had gained consciousness and was stalking them. Animals fled into the forests, refusing to return, their cries adding a surreal soundtrack to the tension-laden nights. Families tried to reinforce their homes, stacking stones, bolting doors, and covering windows. Yet these measures felt trivial against a threat that defied comprehension. The cult's preparation intensified, their movements more deliberate, their rituals more pronounced, though hidden in the folds of forests and hills. Initiates honed their skills with fire, rehearsing techniques that combined efficiency with terror, ensuring that when the night arrived, every flame served a purpose: destruction, control, and psychological domination. Observers reported seeing fires set in patterns, forming eerie symbols that glowed briefly in the night before being extinguished, signaling readiness or marking territory. The cult's hierarchy ensured that each member understood their role. Leaders directed attacks with precision, scouts monitored villages for potential resistance, and executors maintained the ritualistic flow, moving in unison with an almost mechanical efficiency. Villagers, sensing something unnatural, attempted to flee, but the cult anticipated these moves. Paths out of the highlands were monitored, roads sabotaged, and ambushes set, ensuring that no one could escape once the flames were unleashed. Rumors amplified the fear. Whispered stories of previous victims, charred remains, and disappearing families circulated in hushed tones, spreading panic before any direct encounter. The cult seemed to feed on this fear, their rituals designed to heighten tension, to prepare the minds of both their victims and their own members for the ultimate act of destruction. In these final days, the highlands themselves seemed to respond. Winds shifted unpredictably, carrying the faint smell of smoke where no fire burned. Trees groaned as if in warning, and the moon cast distorted shadows that played tricks on the eye. Survivors later described an uncanny awareness, as though the landscape itself conspired with the cult to trap, confuse, and terrify. Communication among villagers became frantic. Families tried to warn one another, yet the cult's silent movement and knowledge of the terrain rendered these efforts largely ineffective. Even those who had once been skeptical of the rumors now understood that something incomprehensibly malevolent was approaching. The psychological warfare was as potent as the physical threat. Villagers reported hearing footsteps outside homes, faint chanting that seemed to move through walls, and sudden flashes of light in the distance. These phenomena created a pervasive anxiety, leaving individuals exhausted, fearful, and less capable of rational response. The cult's belief in fire as both divine tool and weapon infused every action with purpose. Initiates were conditioned to view every flame as sacred, every victim as necessary, and every failure as a moral flaw to be corrected through further devotion. By the time the night of mass murder arrived, this preparation had created a force that was nearly unstoppable, blending fanaticism, strategic brilliance, and psychological manipulation into a single horrifying entity. Survivors described moments before the attack with a sense of distorted time. The wind, the moonlight, and the shifting shadows all seemed synchronized with the cult's approach. Families huddled together praying, whispering warnings or attempting futile barricades. Children cried silently, sensing the threat in a way that adults could only acknowledge with dread. The culmination of these days, weeks, and months of preparation set the stage for the most horrifying act in the Highlands' history. The cult's meticulous buildup ensured that when flames erupted, resistance would be minimal, escape routes controlled, and psychological terror maximized. This period before the massacre was not just anticipation. It was an orchestrated, methodical, and terrifying prelude that amplified the horror to unimaginable levels. By understanding the buildup, one grasps the scope of the cult's dedication, the scale of their planning, and the depth of the fear inflicted upon the highlands. The villagers' unease, the animal behavior, the atmospheric oddities, and the cult's precise coordination all combined to create a tension so thick that when the first torches lit the night, it erupted into complete, unrelenting chaos. Every detail, from the chanting to the torch placement, was rehearsed, ensuring that the cult's philosophy of purification through fire could be executed flawlessly. The night of 200 burned victims was the inevitable outcome of weeks of preparation, fear cultivation, and ritualistic obsession. Scotland's highlands, haunted by every flicker and whisper, bore witness to the unthinkable, and the build-up itself became a story of dread, ensuring that even before the first flame touched thatch and timber, the villages were already psychologically scorched by the cult's presence. The night arrived, thick with darkness and an unnatural stillness that pressed against the villages like a living entity. Smoke rose from distant forests, faint at first but growing in density and color until the first flickers of orange ignited the horizon. Families huddled in homes, barricaded doors, and whispered prayers. Yet the cult moved with relentless purpose, torches cutting through the night, shadows dancing with sinister precision. The initial strikes were swift. Homes on the outskirts of villages were engulfed in flames before anyone could react. The cult's coordination was flawless. Teams moved silently, lighting fires, guiding victims into traps, and ensuring that escape was nearly impossible. Screams echoed across the highlands, blending with the roar of fire, the crackle of collapsing structures, and the chilling chants of the cult members. Those who attempted to flee were intercepted, some captured and dragged back to the flames, others forced into hiding where the fire soon followed. The orange glow reflected in the eyes of the cult, masks twisted in grotesque expressions, torches held high as if conducting a symphony of destruction. Survivors later recounted moments of incomprehensible horror. Entire families disappearing in seconds, animals fleeing only to vanish into flames, and fires that seemed to leap independently, consuming barns, cottages, and livestock alike. Panic spread like wildfire, each attempt at resistance met with brutal force. The cult's use of fire was both tactical and symbolic. It served as a weapon, a signal, and a ritualistic expression of their devotion. Flames were guided, controlled, and intensified in ways that seemed impossible, leading historians to speculate on supernatural intervention, or at least extraordinary mastery of incendiary techniques. Villagers described the sight of their homes collapsing, the heat intense and disorienting, smoke so thick it choked the lungs and obscured vision. The cult moved through this chaos with calculated intent, ensuring that no survivor could organize or mount effective resistance. Families huddled in cellars, basements, and hidden rooms, listening to the fire devour their lives above, some praying, others sobbing silently. The cult's chants rose above the roar of destruction, rhythmic, hypnotic, and terrifying, as though they were conducting the flames themselves, orchestrating death with the precision of a maestro. Outside the villages, the hills reflected the night in an apocalyptic panorama, lines of fire cutting across valleys, shadows moving in perfect synchronization with the cult's intent, and the distant cries of victims carried on the wind. Those who fled into forests found paths blocked or engulfed by sudden flames, the cult's foresight evident in every placement of timber, brush, and torch. By the middle of the night, the magnitude of the massacre became apparent. Over 200 souls were consumed by fire, their lives extinguished in moments, leaving only smoldering ruins and the lingering scent of charred earth. Witnesses later spoke of the cult's final movements, their exit silent and untraceable, disappearing into the highlands as though the night itself had swallowed them. Flames continued to burn unchecked, devouring everything in sight, leaving behind blackened soil and twisted remnants of life. Survivors were few, scattered and traumatized. Their escape owed more to chance than skill. The cult had executed its plan with ruthless efficiency, each fire, chant, and movement perfectly synchronized to maximize destruction and fear. The village became a tableau of horror, the night illuminated by infernos, shadows, and the macabre dance of fire worship. Scholars analyzing these events noted a disturbing level of coordination, almost military in precision, combined with ritualistic obsession that elevated murder to an art form. The cult had succeeded in creating a night of unparalleled terror, leaving behind psychological scars as profound as the physical devastation. Those who emerged at dawn found a landscape unrecognizable, blackened hills, smoking ruins, and an eerie silence that spoke louder than screams ever could. The cult had vanished, leaving only the aftermath, but the memory of their presence lingered in every charred beam, every ash-covered path, and every survivor's haunted gaze. The scale of the massacre, the precision of the cult, and the brutality of the flames created a legend that would endure for generations, a tale of fanaticism, cruelty, and the destructive power of obsessive devotion. The highlands themselves seemed changed, the night of fire casting an invisible mark upon the land, a curse whispered in the wind and carried in the fearful stories of descendants. Survivors' accounts emphasize the terror not only of being burned, but of witnessing the methodical destruction of neighbors, friends, and family. The cult's actions were almost ritualistic in every sense, blending death, worship, and fear into a single horrifying performance. The screams, the flames, the shadows, and the chants became intertwined in memory, a permanent imprint on the psyche of those who lived, ensuring that the event would never be forgotten. By the time daylight arrived, 200 victims were gone, villages reduced to smoking remnants, and the cult already vanished, leaving historians, survivors, and future generations to grapple with the scale of horror and the sophistication of the massacre. The climax of the night revealed the terrifying efficiency, devotion, and brutality of the cult, establishing their legend as one of the darkest chapters in Scotland's history. As the night deepened, the inferno spread like a living entity, consuming everything in its path, guided by the cult's meticulous planning. Families huddled in basements and hidden alcoves, their hearts pounding, breath shallow as flames devoured the roofs above them. The cult moved silently among the chaos, torches in hand, chanting in unison, their grotesque masks reflecting the glow of destruction. Some survivors reported that the fire seemed to anticipate their movements, trapping escape routes, splitting groups apart, and ensuring that no one could flee without encountering flames. The cult's leaders orchestrated each action with precision, signaling with subtle gestures, guiding initiates to areas of maximum destruction, and ensuring that every victim's life ended within their ritualistic design. Smoke choked the air, thick and acrid, searing lungs and blinding eyes. The heat was unbearable, yet the cult pressed on, seemingly immune to its effects, moving with purpose, devotion, and a terrifying calm. Villagers screamed, cried, and prayed, but their voices were drowned by the roar of fire, the cracking of timber, and the relentless chanting. The combination of physical terror and psychological domination ensured that resistance was minimal. Some attempted to flee into the forests, only to be intercepted by members lying in wait. Torches raised to ignite traps and corral the terrified villagers back toward the flames. The cult's strategy was flawless. The highlands' natural terrain became a weapon in their hands, guiding victims into deadly zones, limiting escape, and amplifying the horror of the night. Survivors recounted witnessing families consumed together, their screams echoing through the valleys. The grotesque spectacle of human suffering elevated to a perverse form of worship. The cult's dedication to ritualistic perfection extended to every element of the night. Timing, placement, movement, and even the direction of the wind were utilized to maximize the spread and impact of fire. Observers who lived through the night described the surreal horror. Shadows moving independently, flames leaping without wind, and torches floating unnaturally, as though controlled by an unseen force. The chanting continued without pause, a hypnotic rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the crackling fire, the screams of victims, and the destruction itself. Even after many victims had perished, the cult pressed forward, ensuring that no structure remained untouched, no family left unscathed, and no witness remained untraumatized. By midnight, the magnitude of the disaster was fully apparent. Over 200 villagers had perished, their homes and possessions reduced to ash, and the highlands transformed into a landscape of horror. Survivors who later emerged described the scene as apocalyptic. Blackened hills, pillars of smoke rising toward the sky, and the faintest flickers of torchlight indicating that the cult's work was not yet complete. The cult then vanished as silently as they had arrived, leaving behind the devastation and the echoes of their chants, which seemed to linger in the air long after the flames had died. Historians examining the event centuries later noted the precision of the attack, the ritualistic patterns, and the coordinated movement that suggested an intelligence beyond simple human planning. Some speculated that the cult had developed techniques to manipulate fire in ways that bordered on the supernatural, amplifying the scale and intensity of the massacre. The night's events left deep psychological scars. Survivors recounted dreams haunted by flames, shadows, and chanting. Nightmares so vivid that waking hours brought no relief. Villages were left depopulated, families broken, and a sense of fear permeated the highlands for generations. Even decades later, locals reported strange lights, unexplained heat, and distant chanting in abandoned fields and forests, a residual effect of the cult's night of destruction. The climax of the massacre revealed the terrifying combination of human fanaticism, strategic brilliance, and ritualized cruelty. Every act, from torch placement to the methodical targeting of homes, was calculated to maximize suffering and enforce obedience to the cult's philosophy of purification through fire. The 200 victims became a symbol of both the cult's power and the horror that fanaticism can unleash. The physical devastation was matched only by the psychological terror left behind. The lingering smell of smoke, the blackened earth, the remnants of homes, and the knowledge that an invisible, omnipotent force had orchestrated every death with chilling perfection. The Night of Fire became legend, a cautionary tale etched into the consciousness of Scotland, ensuring that the cult's brutality would never be forgotten. Survivors and historians alike emphasized the surreal perfection of the massacre. Flames that obeyed unseen commands, shadows that seemed alive, and chanting that resonated in memory long after the night ended. The cult had achieved its objective with horrifying efficiency, leaving the highlands scarred, communities shattered, and a legacy of fear that would persist for generations. The climax was complete. A night where fanatic devotion, ritualistic precision, and the uncontrollable power of fire converged to extinguish over 200 lives and leave behind an indelible mark of haunted, brutal, and tragic history. The morning after the massacre revealed a landscape of unimaginable horror. Smoke lingered in the highlands, rising in thin, sorrowful columns from the charred remains of homes and barns. The air was thick with ash and the acrid smell of burnt timber, mingled with the scent of human flesh, a horrifying testament to the night's destruction. Survivors emerged cautiously, stepping over smoldering debris, their eyes wide with shock, their voices trembling as they called out for missing family members and neighbors. Many were never found, their remains reduced to ashes or scattered across the highlands, leaving families with grief compounded by uncertainty. The psychological toll was immense. Children who had hidden in cellars were traumatized beyond measure, some refusing to speak for weeks, others haunted by visions of flames, masks, and chanting that replayed endlessly in their minds. Adults struggled to process the enormity of the loss, the senselessness of destruction, and the realization that a meticulously planned act of fanaticism had eradicated entire communities in a single night. The physical landscape bore permanent scars. Hillsides were blackened, forests burned to stumps, and the fertile earth that once sustained crops was rendered barren in many areas. Villages were left in ruins, forcing survivors to seek shelter in neighboring towns or makeshift camps. The loss of livestock, tools, and homes compounded the difficulty of rebuilding, leaving many in states of extreme poverty and desperation. News of the massacre spread slowly, carried by travelers and survivors who dared recount the horrors. Authorities arrived days later, their response hampered by the highlands' geography, limited manpower, and the cult's careful planning. Investigators were confronted with scenes of overwhelming devastation. Entire families vanished, structures incinerated, and evidence obscured by fire. Efforts to track the cult proved futile. They had vanished into the hills, leaving no trace of their movements or origin. Communities attempted to document the event, recording testimonies, sketching maps, and noting the patterns of destruction. Survivors' accounts highlighted the cult's terrifying coordination, the methodical targeting of homes, and the ritualistic behavior that framed every act of the massacre. These narratives formed the foundation of what historians would later term one of the darkest nights in Scotland's history. The social impact was profound. Villages that had existed for generations were depopulated, families destroyed, and communities fractured beyond repair. Survivors, burdened with trauma and guilt, often migrated to urban areas or safer rural regions, seeking anonymity and escape from memories that haunted every path, forest, and hill. Cultural memory transformed the night into legend. Stories of the cult, their masks, chanting, and devotion to fire were passed down orally, often exaggerated by fear and superstition, becoming a cautionary tale for generations. The highlands themselves became synonymous with terror, Travelers avoided certain paths. Forests were regarded as haunted, and the lingering smell of smoke became a symbolic reminder of the atrocity. Psychological studies of survivors noted signs of post-traumatic stress, chronic anxiety, and depression. Many reported recurring nightmares, flashbacks, and a pervasive sense of being watched, suggesting that the cult's influence persisted beyond the physical destruction. Some villagers refused to rebuild entirely, leaving burned-out plots as memorials, while others attempted reconstruction under the shadow of fear, haunted by uncertainty and the potential return of the cult. Authorities documented the event, but their reports were limited, focused on the observable destruction rather than the cult's motivations or methods. Some records suggested that the highlands' remoteness hindered full understanding, leaving much of the event shrouded in mystery and speculation. Religious leaders interpreted the massacre as divine punishment or a test of faith, offering comfort to survivors while reinforcing cultural narratives that intertwined spirituality with fear of fanaticism. The aftermath extended beyond Scotland. News carried by travelers and traders spread to nearby regions, instilling caution and a sense of dread in neighboring communities. Scholars, historians, and writers would later reference the event as a chilling example of human fanaticism, ritualized violence, and the destructive power of coordinated cruelty. Economically, the highlands suffered greatly. Crops, livestock, and trade routes were destroyed, isolating survivors and prolonging recovery. Communities faced starvation, poverty, and the long-term challenge of rebuilding amidst fear, trauma, and the constant reminder of what had occurred. Survivors' testimonies emphasized the combination of meticulous planning, psychological manipulation, and ritualistic devotion, highlighting that the massacre was neither random nor impulsive, but a deliberate act executed with horrifying precision. Oral histories conveyed the lingering presence of the cult, shadows in the forests, flickers of fire in the distance, and whispers carried by wind, all reinforcing a collective memory steeped in fear. The emotional aftermath was compounded by the absence of justice. The cult vanished without trace, leaving authorities powerless, communities grieving, and a generation marked by trauma. Scotland's highlands became a silent monument to the horrors, the memory of the night of fire etched into every hill, valley, and remnant of burned earth. Survivors struggled with guilt, survivors' remorse, and the unanswerable questions of why their families perished and how the cult had achieved such flawless execution. Generations carried the legacy, embedding it into folklore, legends, and cultural consciousness. The aftermath was thus not limited to physical destruction. It permeated the psyche of communities, the identity of the region, and the historical record as a testament to the devastating power of fanaticism, ritualistic precision, and human cruelty elevated to terrifying art. As days turned into weeks, the survivors attempted to rebuild their lives, though the trauma and loss weighed heavily upon them. The burned villages, blackened fields, and scorched forests were constant reminders of the night that had changed everything. Families struggled to recover their livelihoods, tending to what little crops survived, attempting to find or raise livestock, and reconstructing homes from the ruins. Yet the memory of the cult's presence remained, a psychological scar as deep as the physical devastation. Some survivors formed small communities in safer areas, sharing stories to warn one another and to preserve the memory of what had transpired. Others were too traumatized to speak of it, retreating into silence, isolation, and a perpetual fear of recurrence. Historians later noted the depth of despair in the aftermath. Entire generations were affected, cultural practices were altered, and local superstitions intensified. The highlands became a region where even the bravest travelers hesitated, wary of lingering danger and stories of the cult's supernatural command of fire. The scale of the loss created economic strain as well. Crops destroyed by fire, trade disrupted, and essential resources lost made recovery painstakingly slow. Many survivors relied on aid from neighboring towns, charitable organizations, or government assistance, though such support was limited and often delayed by the remote terrain. Psychological studies of descendants suggested that trauma persisted across generations, with children inheriting fear, nightmares, and heightened awareness of fire, shadows, and ritualistic sounds even decades after the event. Survivors' accounts emphasized that the cult's influence extended beyond the physical destruction. Even when absent, their presence seemed to linger, with unexplained fires, shadows, and whispers instilling dread in those who remained in the highlands. Communities developed rituals to ward off evil, built shrines or markers at burned sites, and maintained oral histories that detailed the methods, symbols, and chants of the cult. These practices served both as memorials and as psychological defenses, helping to cope with the incomprehensible scale of loss. Scholars studying the event later remarked on the cult's meticulous planning and methodical execution, noting the sophistication and discipline required to destroy 200 lives in a single night. The combination of fanatic devotion, strategic coordination, and ritualistic precision made the massacre a singular event in history, one that illustrated the horrifying potential of human obsession and cruelty. The cultural impact persisted for generations. Artists, writers, and storytellers depicted the night in vivid, haunting detail, preserving the memory and instilling fear. Songs, poems, and visual representations captured the terror, the flames, and the masked cult members, often blending fact and legend in ways that enhanced the story's haunting power. Survivors' testimonies provided detailed accounts. The sound of fire consuming wood, the heat that seared skin even from a distance, the grotesque masks reflecting the inferno, and the hypnotic chants that orchestrated death with ritualistic precision. These accounts became the backbone of historical understanding, forming a record that both shocked and fascinated future generations. The cult's disappearance ensured that justice was never served, leaving survivors and historians alike to grapple with fear, grief, and unanswered questions. Communities established commemorations, rituals, and memorials to honor the dead, embedding the event into cultural consciousness. Scotland's Highlands became synonymous with haunted terror, and local superstition warned of the cult's lingering presence, reinforcing the psychological aftermath. Over time, the land slowly began to recover physically, yet the emotional and cultural scars endured. The Night of Fire became legend, a story repeated in whispers, in folklore, and in the collective memory of generations. Scholars attempting to separate myth from reality face challenges. Unexplained phenomena, survivor exaggerations, and the inherent terror of the event made objective analysis difficult. Yet, through oral histories, journals, and physical evidence, it was clear that the cult's actions were deliberate, coordinated, and executed with terrifying skill. The aftermath also included a pervasive sense of fear and vigilance. Villagers learned to observe their surroundings obsessively, wary of unusual shadows, distant flickers of fire, or strange sounds carried on the wind. These behaviors, born from trauma, became embedded in community practices, influencing social structures, rituals, and daily life. Economically, socially, and psychologically, the Highlands were forever changed. Survivors faced the difficult task of reconciling their losses, rebuilding communities and preserving memory, all while existing under the shadow of an unknown, malevolent force that had executed one of the most horrifying acts in history. The combination of physical destruction, psychological trauma, and cultural legacy ensured that the event would remain a cautionary tale, haunting Scotland and influencing historical analysis, folklore, and superstition for generations to come. In essence, the aftermath of the cult's Night of Fire was as devastating as the massacre itself, leaving a landscape scarred, communities traumatized, and history forever marked by horror, fanaticism, and ritualistic brutality. Despite the passage of decades, the cult responsible for the Night of Fire remained shrouded in enigma, leaving historians, researchers, and locals with more questions than answers. No trace of their origin was ever discovered. No records revealed the identities of the leaders, and their sudden disappearance only deepened the sense of mystery. Some speculated that the cult originated from secret societies in the Highlands or neighboring regions, trained in arcane rituals that blended spiritual devotion with precise mastery of fire. Others believed they had supernatural abilities, explaining how they coordinated attacks with such flawless precision and seemed to manipulate flames beyond ordinary means. Eyewitness accounts provided chilling consistency: masks, chanting, synchronized movements, and fires that spread unnaturally quickly. Yet without physical evidence, skeptics argued that fear had amplified perception, transforming ordinary fires and chaotic movement into mythic precision. Stories passed down through generations described sightings of the cult long after the massacre. Travelers spoke of masked figures emerging in forests, fires appearing inexplicably, and distant chanting that faded when approached. Whether these were residual effects of trauma, folklore embellishments, or actual remnants of the cult remained unresolved. Scholars debated the possibility of secretive enclaves in the Highlands, isolated communities devoted to fanaticism, whose existence had been overlooked by authorities. The consistent patterns of the cult's behavior suggested organization, discipline, and training, but the exact methods remained elusive. Forensic examination of surviving ruins revealed patterns of fire ignition that were unusual, almost ritualistic, indicating knowledge beyond ordinary villagers or even military tactics of the time. Some historians propose that the cult had discovered a method to manipulate the environment to their advantage. Understanding wind patterns, the behavior of different woods, and timing attacks to coincide with environmental conditions. Yet no manuals, notes, or surviving members were ever found to confirm these theories. The psychological footprint of the cult was perhaps more tangible than physical traces. Survivors' trauma, nightmares, and vivid recollections formed a complex tapestry of fear that could be studied and analyzed. The consistent descriptions of masks, chants, and coordinated movements suggested that the cult operated under a philosophy that elevated destruction to a sacred act, embedding ritual in every movement and action. Local folklore transformed the cult into a symbol of cursed evil, blending historical fact with supernatural speculation. Some villagers claimed that the highlands themselves had absorbed the cult's essence, creating areas of lingering malevolence where fires spontaneously ignited or shadows appeared to move with intent. The absence of justice or retribution amplified the mystery. Authorities never apprehended members, nor did they discover safe havens or secret training grounds. The sheer scale of the massacre, combined with meticulous planning, suggested organizational resources that could not easily vanish without a trace, yet disappear they did. Some historians considered the possibility that the cult dispersed into distant regions, abandoning fanaticism in favor of anonymity, leaving behind only memory, legend, and the haunting scar on the highlands. Investigations into potential surviving members or descendants yielded little evidence, though sporadic reports of ritualistic behavior persisted in folklore. Anthropologists noted that cultural memory often magnified fear, blending fact and legend, but the consistency of certain details, timing, flame patterns, masks, hinted at a factual core beneath the myth. The mystery of the cult's motives added another layer of complexity. Why commit such total destruction? Why target 200 victims in a single night? Why disappear entirely afterward? Scholars theorize that the cult viewed the act as purification, offering sacrifice in the form of mass death to a deity of fire, blending religious devotion with psychological domination over both victims and surviving communities. Others suggested that the cult sought notoriety, aiming to leave a permanent mark on history through terror. Scientific analysis struggled to explain certain elements. Eyewitnesses reported flames behaving unusually, spreading faster than anticipated, or changing direction unpredictably. Some posited that the cult may have experimented with accelerants or techniques lost to time. Others suggested that perception, influenced by terror, may have exaggerated ordinary fire behavior, creating the legend of supernatural control. Attempts to locate remnants of the cult's knowledge were futile. No journals, symbols, or artifacts survived. Buildings used by the cult were burned to ash, landscapes altered, and members vanished without trace. This left historians reliant on survivor testimonies, folklore, and conjecture, maintaining a tension between evidence and legend. The highlands themselves became part of the mystery. Locals spoke of areas where fire refused to burn, forests that seemed alive with whispered warnings, and paths that appeared and disappeared, contributing to the narrative of an enduring, enigmatic presence. The combination of historical record, oral history, and unexplained phenomena solidified the cult's status as a legendary cursed entity. Even modern researchers find it difficult to separate fact from myth, as the psychological, environmental, and historical layers intertwine, forming a complex puzzle that remains unsolved. The mystery is further compounded by the absence of accountability. With no captured members, no trial, and no clear lineage, the cult exists solely in memory, legend, and the persistent marks left upon the land and the psyche of descendants. This unresolved aspect ensures that every story, song, or visual depiction continues to evoke fear and fascination, preserving the cult's terrifying legacy for future generations. The highlands remained haunted by the events of that night, with survivors and descendants claiming to experience signs of the cult's lingering presence decades later. Fires ignited inexplicably, Shadows moved where none should exist, and whispers carried through valleys in the dead of night. Folklore grew around these phenomena, blending historical fact with supernatural speculation, creating a narrative in which the cult's influence transcended mortality. Researchers attempting to document these occurrences found consistent patterns in locations and behaviors, though the explanations ranged from environmental anomalies to mass psychological trauma. Villagers described areas where the land itself seemed cursed. Crops failed, animals refused to enter certain fields, and travelers reported feelings of being watched or followed. These descriptions fueled speculation that the cult's rituals had imbued the terrain with a residual energy, a cursed imprint of fanaticism and destruction. Survivors' accounts emphasized that the cult's strategy was not limited to physical devastation, but extended into the psychological and spiritual realm, embedding fear into the very identity of the highlands. This pervasive sense of unease became a defining feature of life in the region. Historians noted that the consistency of oral histories suggested an actual network of the cult rather than pure legend. Details of masks, chanting, coordinated fire placement, and escape routes were too precise to be purely imaginative, indicating the cult operated with deliberate, ritualistic, and tactical intelligence. The mystery also encompasses the cult's motives. Some believed that the act was a form of purification, sacrificing 200 lives to a deity of fire, an extreme expression of religious devotion. Others proposed political or social motivations, a desire to eliminate certain families or assert dominance over the highlands. Yet no written records or declarations survived, leaving only speculation and inference. Scientific studies attempted to reconstruct the fire patterns and movements, revealing extraordinary knowledge of environmental manipulation, wind currents, and ignition techniques. While some flames behaved according to natural laws, others appeared to spread with unnatural speed, leading to theories that the cult possessed knowledge or methods now lost to history. Investigations into surviving members or descendants yielded no concrete evidence. Sporadic reports of masked figures, secretive gatherings, and strange fires persisted in folklore, though no verification was possible. This absence of proof solidifies the cult's enduring mystery, leaving researchers to balance witness accounts with legend. The psychological impact of the mystery was immense. Communities avoided certain areas, travelers took alternate routes, and generations grew up with a collective fear, conditioning responses to shadow, fire, and unusual sound. The cult's influence endured through anticipation and imagination, a testament to their success in embedding terror in both the physical and mental landscape. Artifacts, ruins, and charred remains provided only partial insight. While they confirmed destruction, they offered no understanding of the cult's inner workings, hierarchy, or the precise philosophy guiding the massacre. Oral histories and songs became the primary medium of memory, preserving details through repetition, but also contributing to embellishment and supernatural interpretations. The unresolved nature of the event fueled a narrative of cursed devotion, enhancing the cult's legendary status. Each retelling reinforced the horror, ensuring that even those born decades later understood the fear embedded in the highlands. Some scholars theorized that the cult's disappearance was deliberate, leaving behind chaos and terror as a permanent monument to their power. The efficiency, coordination, and ritualistic precision demonstrated that their intentions went beyond simple destruction. They sought to create a legacy of fear that would endure in memory and culture. Modern researchers visiting the highlands report unusual occurrences: heat pockets with no fire source, distorted shadows, and whispers in the wind. Whether these are residual psychological effects, environmental phenomena, or echoes of the cult's rituals remains unresolved. The enduring mystery ensures that the Night of Fire and the cult's actions are never fully understood, preserving their legend and the sense of cursed presence in the highlands. The cult's influence extended beyond physical destruction, establishing a psychological and cultural legacy that permeates stories, songs, and the collective memory. Historians, anthropologists, and folklorists continue to study the events, blending fact, survivor accounts, and environmental analysis to reconstruct the terror, yet the full truth remains elusive. This unresolved aspect cements the cult's legacy as one of the most enigmatic and horrifying forces in Scotland's history. The lingering question persists: who were they? Where did they come from, and could they ever return? The absence of answers ensures that the highlands remain haunted, both by memory and by the unseen presence of a cult that executed its Night of Fire with precision, ritual, and terrifying devotion. The mystery in its entirety serves as a chilling reminder of human fanaticism, the destructive power of ritualistic obsession, and the ability of fear to transcend generations, embedding itself into landscape culture and memory. The Highlands never fully recovered from that night of fire. Survivors carried scars that would never fade, their memories etched with the faces of lost family, the roar of flames, and the grotesque masks of the cult. Every valley, every scorched hill, and every ash-covered field bore witness to horror that could never be undone. Families rebuilt as best they could, yet the emptiness left by the 200 victims remained palpable, an invisible weight pressing on communities and influencing generations. Stories of the cult were passed from parent to child, each retelling carrying both warning and fear, ensuring that the memory of fanaticism and ritualistic brutality remained alive. Children grew up with tales of flames that obeyed unseen commands, shadows that moved with malevolent intent, and chants that echoed in the forests long after the night had ended. The physical destruction was devastating, but the emotional and cultural impact endured far longer. Villagers avoided certain paths, abandoned burned-out homes, and marked sites of horror with shrines or symbols to ward off perceived lingering evil. Survivors described a pervasive fear, an unshakable sense that the cult's presence had imprinted itself upon the land itself. Even decades later, travelers reported glimpses of shadows, flickering lights, and whispers carried on the wind, phenomena that some believed were residual traces of the cult's rituals. The legend of the cult grew with each generation, blending historical record with folklore, superstition, and the collective memory of terror. Scholars attempting to separate fact from myth encountered contradictions. Details of masks, fire behavior, and coordinated attacks were consistent, while other aspects, floating torches, unnatural flame spread, and chanting that seemed to control the environment, suggested supernatural embellishment. Communities coped by establishing rituals, memorials, and oral histories, embedding warnings and lessons into cultural consciousness. Survivors often avoided speaking of the night openly, yet their reticence only amplified curiosity and fear, ensuring that the Highlands remained a region steeped in haunted memory. The long-term psychological impact was profound. Survivors reported nightmares that replayed the massacre with vivid intensity, flashbacks triggered by smoke, fire, or chanting, and a heightened awareness of shadows and environmental sounds. Children inherited the fear indirectly, learning caution and superstition as part of daily life. Economically, the Highlands were set back decades. Rebuilding villages, restoring farmland, and re-establishing trade routes took generations. Families who had once thrived were reduced to subsistence, reliant on neighboring towns or aid to survive. The Night of Fire became a touchstone for historical analysis, folklore, and cultural memory. A cautionary tale illustrating the devastating power of fanaticism and ritualistic obsession. Historians examined every available detail: survivor accounts, patterns of fire spread, geographic observations, and environmental factors. Despite centuries of study, many aspects of the cult's operation remained a mystery, their motives and methods partially obscured by the absence of surviving members or documents. Local legends maintained that the Highlands were haunted, with areas where no fire would burn, shadows moved unnaturally, or faint chanting could be heard on still nights. Whether these were psychological manifestations, environmental anomalies, or echoes of a long-departed cult remained unresolved. The human cost remained central to the story. 200 lives extinguished in a single night, families destroyed, and a generation traumatized. The Highlands became synonymous with horror, ritualized fanaticism, and the lingering question of how human devotion could manifest as pure destruction. Survivors attempted to reconcile with the trauma through storytelling, ritual observance, and physical memorials. Burned-out homesteads were left as monuments, and commemorative practices ensured that the victims were remembered, even as the cult itself vanished into legend. Communities developed social norms shaped by fear, vigilance, avoidance of certain areas, and communal ceremonies that both honored the dead and attempted to prevent future horrors. Even scholars centuries later found themselves affected by the story, haunted by the scale of the massacre, the precision of the cult, and the psychological manipulation embedded in every act. The Night of Fire became a lens through which human cruelty, devotion, and organizational skill were analyzed, offering lessons and warnings for future generations. While the cult was gone, its legacy persisted. Physical scars healed slowly, but the cultural, psychological, and environmental impacts remained. Legends of masked figures, ritualistic chanting, and flames that obeyed unseen commands continued to terrify and captivate, ensuring that the night of 200 burned victims remained etched into collective memory. The ending of this chapter in Scotland's history is both tragic and haunting. Lives lost, communities fractured, and a legacy of fear that transcended the boundaries of time. The Highlands stood scarred, a testament to fanaticism, meticulous planning, and the devastating power of ritualized violence, a place where history and legend intertwine in shadows, fire, and memory. As years turned into decades, the story of the Night of Fire became a permanent part of Scottish history, folklore, and cautionary tales. Survivors aged, passing down stories of flames that obeyed unseen commands, shadows that moved with intent, and the masked cult members who orchestrated unimaginable destruction. Every anniversary of the massacre was marked by reflection, remembrance, and fear, embedding the trauma deeper into the cultural consciousness. The Highlands themselves bore the scars: blackened earth, burned-out structures, and patches of forest that never fully recovered. Scholars visiting these areas noted a persistent sense of unease, often describing the land as having a lingering presence, a residual echo of the cult's fanaticism. Communities attempted to reclaim their lives, rebuild villages, and restore farmland, but the psychological legacy lingered. Children grew up hearing stories of the Night of Fire, learning caution, superstition, and respect for forces beyond human comprehension. Some areas became permanently avoided, labeled cursed or haunted, a living reminder of the horrors that had occurred. Researchers studying the event noted that the cult's planning and execution were unprecedented. The combination of strategic intelligence, ritualistic precision, and psychological terror created an event that was both horrific and extraordinary in scope. The cult had vanished without a trace, yet its influence endured, shaping social behaviors, folklore, and collective memory. Survivor testimonies emphasized the complexity of trauma, describing nightmares, flashbacks, and heightened sensitivity to fire, shadows, and sound. These psychological effects persisted across generations, influencing both family dynamics and cultural practices. Memorials and shrines were established at sites of burned homes, marking areas of loss, remembrance, and vigilance. Some families refused to return entirely, leaving plots abandoned as silent monuments to the 200 victims. Artistic representations, songs, and written accounts sought to capture the horror, embedding the events into broader Scottish culture and ensuring that the story would not fade with time. Scholars analyzed patterns, environmental factors, and psychological elements, yet many questions remained unanswered. The cult's motives, methods, and origin remained shrouded in mystery, leaving only speculation, folklore, and survivor accounts to fill the gaps. The cultural and psychological aftermath extended beyond the Highlands. Travelers, historians, and storytellers carried the tale to distant regions, weaving it into broader narratives of fanaticism, ritualized violence, and human cruelty. The Night of Fire became a reference point for discussions on human behavior, the dangers of obsession, and the destructive power of coordinated fanaticism. Generations inherited the memory of terror, learning caution, respect, and fear through oral histories, rituals, and community practices. Even those born long after the massacre felt its shadow, aware of the lingering presence, the cursed landscape, and the cultural memory of fanaticism turned into devastating action. The ending is haunting in its permanence. While the cult itself disappeared, the psychological, cultural, and environmental impact persisted. Scotland's Highlands became a landscape of memory, legend, and fear, where the line between history and folklore blurred. Survivors' descendants carried the trauma, perpetuating awareness, caution, and reverence for the power that human fanaticism can unleash. Scholars and storytellers preserved the memory, ensuring that the Night of Fire, the 200 victims, and the masked cult members would never be forgotten. The story serves as a chilling reminder of the potential for human cruelty, the meticulous precision of organized violence, and the enduring impact of fear and fanaticism. It illustrates how destruction can transcend physical devastation, embedding itself in culture, psyche, and landscape. Even centuries later, the echoes of that night reverberate. Smoke lingering in memory, shadows moving in imagination, and whispers of chanting carried in the wind. The legacy is tragic and haunting. 200 lives extinguished, communities shattered, and a cultural memory that continues to warn, terrify, and intrigue. Scotland's Highlands remain scarred, not only in the soil but in the psyche of its people, a living testament to the dark power of ritual, devotion, and human fanaticism. Every fire, shadow, and whispered story reinforces the chilling lesson. Fanaticism, when combined with precision and devotion, can leave an imprint on both land and memory that endures far beyond the night of its execution. The ending is thus a reflection on loss, horror, and the enduring nature of human memory, where the night of fire continues to haunt, educate, and remind all who hear its story of the capacity for both devotion and destruction intertwined.